The New Orleans Saints rebuild is real. We got all that and a little bit of land yap for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I'm your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, the Saints are helping themselves out on their defensive line before going up against the San Francisco 49ers. They're trying to get ready to deal with Christian McCaffrey. But before we get to that, the Saints make another trade to bring another wide receiver here to New Orleans. And the move signifies that this team is absolutely embracing its rebuild and looking ahead to the future. We got all that coming up for you on this quick episode of Locked On Saints. We appreciate you very much for making us your first listen and being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The New Orleans Saints are telling everybody very much out loud that they are a team that is very much just as concerned about its future as they are concerned about the 2025 season. NFL teams don't typically look very far down the road, but it's very clear with some of the moves that the Saints have made, going all the way back to the trade for Devon Vele, a different wide receiver, then the waiver pickup of another wide receiver, actually, and Trey Palmer, the trade for Awesome Richards to bring him into New Orleans. Saints kind of consistently moving for guys that have multiple years left on their deal. The Saints do it again on Saturday, trading with the New England Patriots to acquire wide receiver Ja'Lynn Polk, who was drafted last year in 2024, has 3 years left on his deal, including 2025. However, he will not see the field on 2025, but this, because he's dealing with a shoulder injury, he was already on injured reserve. And thanks to a 2018 rule change that was proposed by the Denver Broncos, I think, at that time, you can trade for players that are on injured reserve, whether they're on short-term or long-term IR. It's just that they go to your injured reserve list when you acquire them. You can't take them off of the injured reserve list or something like that. So for the Saints, they get Ja'Lynn Polk, but you won't see him in 2025. We'll discuss a little bit about the player, but to me, this move signifies that the Saints are very, very much thinking about what the future in New Orleans looks like. And in particular, they seem to be looking at what the future looks like at the wide receiver position more than just about anything else. So the Saints showing you that the rebuild here in New Orleans is very much real. You don't have to say that you're in a rebuild, but the moves will tell you that the rebuild is absolutely there, or at least that there's some forward thinking in terms of where this team heads in its future. So what would Ja'Lynn Polk bring to this team? Well, in exchange for a 6th-round pick, the Saints, a 6th-round pick in 2027. So 2 drafts from now, they get Ja'Lynn Polk as well as a 7th-round pick in 2028. The Saints in 2028 now have a pick in every round, but 3 7th-round pick selections. In 2026, they have rounds 1 through 5. And then in 2027, they have rounds 1 through 5. And then in 2026, the upcoming draft, they have 1, 2, 3, and then a pick in the 5th and a pick in the 6th. So 5 selections in each of the next 2 drafts at this time. And so we'll see where the Saints go with all this. But for Ja'Lynn Polk, what you get a 6'1", almost at 6'11", 6'1", 203-pound guy that doesn't necessarily have blazing speed. Ran a 4.52 at the combine coming into this year's NFL draft, or coming into the 2024 NFL draft, but is a big time high point, the football kind of guy, can create separation, is very physical at the catch point. He's somebody that operates extremely well against zone coverage, in particular coming out of Washington as he was coming into the NFL draft. His success rate was over 80% against zone, according to our friends over at Reception Perception. The only receiver that was better than that was his teammate, Rome Odunze, who was a 1st-round pick, went to the Chicago Bears, of course. And when you grab a guy like Ja'Lynn Polk that's really good against zone coverage while you're operating in a division like the NFC South, where, and look, I know it's a small sample size, but just in the first week of the season, both the Panthers and the Atlanta Falcons were top 5 in zone coverage percentage. Now, they could have defensive coordinator changes going into next year and things like that, but that's okay. In any case, you're still mostly playing against zone coverage in today's NFL. And even the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who are in kind of the low 20s across the league, play zone coverage over 60% of the time on average. So the Saints grabbing guys that will help them compete within their division, assuming Ja'Lynn Polk makes the roster. This is the nice thing about trading a 6th-round pick 2 drafts from now, is that if he doesn't make the roster, he doesn't make the roster. It's okay, and then you just kind of move on. But the Saints were very high on Ja'Lynn Polk going into the draft last year, something that Luke Johnson over at NOLA.com has reported as well. And that is a player that this team identified as a player that they would like to work with. They went and they got him, but they invested in him for 2026, 2027. Like we said, he's not going to see the field here in 2025. Now, some folks have asked, hey, does this impact or does this change, the course of where things could go for Chris Olave or Rashid Shaheed? Thing to remember is that Chris Olave is on this team next year as of right now. 5th-year option, right? And they already picked up that 5th-year option. So unless they're going to do something crazy and trade him, which is not out of the question, right? You see all of these trades that the Saints are making. Eventually, they're probably going to want to recoup some of these draft picks. And so the Saints being dealers at the trade deadline is very much going to be a conversation. And guys like Chris Olave, Alvin Kamara, and other players are all going to be a part of that conversation. I'm just telling you now. I'm not saying that they should trade either one of them. I'm just telling you that those players are going to be a big-time conversation and big-time talking points across the media landscape about whether or not the Saints are going to make any moves and try to deal at the trade deadline if they're like 2-8 or something like that by week 10 or whatever the new trade deadline date is. So the Saints could end up dealing players to recoup some of those draft picks, but if that's not the case, then I don't think that this acquisition really has much impact on how the Saints feel about Chris Olave. Chris Olave's extension opportunity is all about how Chris Olave plays, not a guy that might be able to be a pretty good 3rd or 4th wide receiver for you if guys like Brandon Cooks, Mason Tipton, and others don't stick around going into or aren't around going into next year. I know Brandon Cooks is on a 2nd-year deal, but a lot of times 2nd-year deals are 1-year deals. So we'll see how things go with that. Rashid Shaheed, though, of course, would be somebody that is also going to be in those contract conversations. But again, if Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed earn their contract extensions, that's what's going to have the impact on their contract extensions, not a 6th-round pick from 2 years later that was traded for, right? The idea here is that the Saints really like Ja'Lynn Polk, and you might have your top 2 guys going into next year, but you want to make sure you've got other people. And so having a Devon Vele, having a Trey Palmer on multiple years on his deal, having a Ja'Lynn Polk with multiple years on his deal, that gives you your wide receiver core moving forward, even led by the 2 guys at the top. And then we'll see what happens if the Saints do end up becoming dealers or sellers at any point during this time. So I don't know that the trade immediately has an impact on the Saints' outlook at the wide receiver position when it comes to the top players there, but certainly gives the Saints a promising young option to see as he returns from that shoulder injury in 2026, an opportunity to be able to stick and hang on with this team as an additional option, or maybe even climb beyond that. 6'1", 203 pounds. He's a physical player. He's a good separator. He's a good route runner, and he's great against zone coverage. And he's got solid hands too. It's a good possession type guy to have around. And you'll see that the Saints have really focused on that. The acquisition of Devon Vele, the acquisition of Trey Palmer, the acquisition of Ja'Lynn Polk. These are all guys that have been at least reliably handed, or if not solidly handed, players. So that's where I think that this goes for New Orleans. But I like the forward thinking for this team. And I think the forward thinking gives you what it is that a lot of folks have been asking for, which is for this team to hit the reset button and start paying attention to its future. Saints very clearly doing that. And this acquisition is just the latest punctuation on that assumption. Coming up next, the New Orleans Saints had their Saturday roster moves. We'll break all of them down, including the clear indication that the Saints are very concerned about Christian McCaffrey, as well they should be. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by friends over at Mazda. Mazda makes cars for those who choose to do more than simply move. They follow what moves them every time that they drive, and that's what makes Mazdas stand out. Mazdas have always stood out to me. I love a Mazda. I've owned Mazdas. I love Mazdas. You're going to be able to find everything that you need there, including some great safety specs as well. And look, it's above and beyond when it comes to them. They've won more IIHS Top Safety Pick Plus awards than anyone else since August of 2025, or rather as of August of 2025. You can feel it every time you get behind the wheel as well. The smooth handling, the intuitive controls, and even that standard all-wheel drive on all of their crossover SUVs. So whether it's a quick drive to practice or maybe a weekend road trip, Mazda makes even everyday drives feel special. It's in the small details that make the big plays. And they're just like there's more to every player, there's more to every Mazda vehicle. Mazda, move and be moved. Today's episode also brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure that you're kicking off your season with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers over at FanDuel can place $5 for your first $5 bet, and if that bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets that you can use across the app, whether you're into live betting, which I absolutely love, like if there's a favorite that's maybe trailing in the third quarter and you can feel that fourth quarter comeback coming on and the odds are in your favor, you can bet on that. I love those kinds of things. They've also got same game parlays and even more. My advice, take your $5 and go and pick a heavy favorite from this weekend's NFL slate and take the money line on them. Right now, the Baltimore Ravens 11.5-point favorites over the Cleveland Browns. Put it there. If you win, you get $300 in bonus bets. So are you ready to play? Well, download the FanDuel app by heading over to FanDuel.com today to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. And if that $5 bet wins, get $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Today's episode of Locked On Saints also brought to you by our friends over at DoorDash. It's the weekend, and that means that it's time to take a look at this week's MVP, Who Delivered, powered by DoorDash. And don't forget, it's Saturday, and you can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks. So head over to the DoorDash app today. We've talked about a couple different guys from last week's game that had a big impact, but for this week for the Saints, I'm going to shout out Bryan Bresee, defensive tackle, on the field goal block coming up, leaping the center with some help from his interior offensive line or defensive line buddies there and getting the block second year in a row with a big-time field goal block down the stretch. And just like Bryan Bresee delivered when it mattered most, DoorDash delivers on your Saturdays. With DoorDash Streaks, you can save every Saturday that you order and stack it all up during the season, and you can save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credit. So order today and next Saturday and the Saturday after that. Keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo period through November 18th. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints are clearly concerned about Christian McCaffrey. As well, they should be. And listen, when I say that they're concerned about Christian McCaffrey, it's not because I feel like they can't do anything to limit Christian McCaffrey. Remember, they were going up against a very good rushing offense last week in week 1 up against the Arizona Cardinals. They gave up over 140 rushing yards, but 52 of them came on one play by Trey Benson, who's a phenomenal talent. But for the Saints, they had a 70.8% success rate in the run game. So they were more successful, and they were one of the most, they were top 10 in the league when it came to that metric. So they were more successful as a run defense than they weren't. They outpaced themselves big time, going back and looking at the success rates from last year's run defense. So we're already starting to see a little bit of early improvement, but now they got a big test up against Christian McCaffrey. And so when I say that they're clearly concerned about Christian McCaffrey, I don't mean that they're in a situation where they're afraid of Christian McCaffrey or anything like that. But I think, though, that they know that if they limit Christian McCaffrey, that could be ball game for them. And the Saints are in position here going into this game to potentially steal an early season win when many of us projected them to go 0-4 to start the season and not see their first win until week 5 up against the New York Giants. I still think that's the way that things will probably play out. But this opportunity for the New Orleans Saints is massive. Like, if there was a time for them to get a win, this is absolutely it. Now, there's still a very good defense over there opposite this New Orleans Saints offense. It's still kind of finding its footing, its identity, all of that other stuff. Nick Bosa, Fred Warner, like, there's still a very good defense over there. However, the Saints are in a pretty good position here. And a big part of keeping that position or potentially converting from being in that position to actually taking advantage of that moment is going to be whether or not they can limit Christian McCaffrey. And if you look at the things that they've done on Saturday, it kind of shows you that they're ready to do that. Number one, they finally moved Julian Blackmon to injured reserve. He's likely done for the season with that torn labrum surgery he had on Friday, it sounded like, from Kellen Moore. It's what I gleaned from his post-practice presser there. And so we won't see him. It'll be Jonas Senker that's going to step in there. And it's good. This is another opportunity where the Saints get the chance to see what they've got in terms of young players, future information, future guidance, all that good stuff. Exactly the type of attitude that this team should be having right now. But then beyond that, they signed Jonah Williams, defensive lineman, to the active roster. They elevate Fadil Diggs, which we expected was going to be the case, that he would be active one way or another, either by being signed back to the roster or by being a standard game day elevation. And then to help out with the numbers, whether it be on special teams or even just safety depth as well, they also elevate Terrell Burgess, who had been missing since, or had been out of practice rather, since that joint practice up against the Los Angeles Rams with an undisclosed injury. Sources tell me that that was a hammy deal, but it seems like everything's good there now. He was at practice all throughout the week, wasn't limited, all that good stuff. So positive signs there for him. So for New Orleans, the thing that you're looking at here is those two defensive linemen, right? And Fadil Diggs was one that we expected. The Saints don't have Chase Young for a second week in a row. And, we said that might be a multi-week thing, but that it's not supposed to be a long-term thing. So ideally, he's back next week. Otherwise, things are going to get a little bit spicy, I think, around those types of conversations from the fan base. And then I think the other one is with that Jonah Williams elevation. It shows you that the Saints are really focused on making sure that they have a rotation and that they have players ready and available to go on the defensive line. And I think a big reason for that is that they want that run defense to step up. It's pretty simple. They want the run defense to step up, and they want that defensive line to stand strong and be fresh and go up against tiring, older offensive linemen over in San Francisco for 4 quarters, trying to keep that run game limited. This is where the Saints have always kind of done the right thing when it comes to the defensive line rotations. But sometimes they did it hockey team wise, right? To where 3 guys would run off, 3 new guys would run on. The Saints didn't do that last week, but towards the second half, you saw, maybe Cam Jordan come off and Fadil Diggs go on, or Carl Granderson comes off and Fadil Diggs goes on, and Jonah Williams comes in, and maybe Nathan Shepard goes out in certain situations and things like that. And so the Saints have been doing still a little bit of a rotation, even though it doesn't look the same as it has in like the Dennis Allen defenses and all that. But there's value there in that rotation because you get those fresher legs, those fresher players out there going up against these offensive linemen that have taken 40, 50, 60 offensive snaps already and who don't get rotated off of the field. And so having these defensive linemen that can rotate in, having these defensive linemen that know the scheme, right? Jonah Williams and Brandon Staley go a little bit back. And they really like what Jonah Williams brings. And especially when you ask about Jonah Williams, the answer almost always gravitates towards what he does in the run game. And so here it is, right? Here it is. This is the game for New Orleans. It's executing on the offensive side and not, being turned over multiple times by that San Francisco defense and taking care of the football, finding ways to run the football, control the clock, and then maybe get the best out of Spencer Rattler that you've seen so far. All of those things would help, although the game doesn't rest on any one of those things singularly, outside of maybe not allowing that San Francisco team to turn you over, right? Forcing turnovers, giving the ball away, all that kind of stuff. Like that's all, that will end the game very quickly for New Orleans. There's no doubt about that. But over on the opposite side of this, it's also about limiting Christian McCaffrey. And if they can limit Christian McCaffrey, that's going to help them out big time over on the offensive side because you want Mac Jones throwing a football, typically speaking, unless he just gets on an absolute tear, which, hey, we've seen it happen, right? But unless that happens, if you're able to kind of limit, right, you're not going to take Christian McCaffrey out of a game. You're not going to neutralize Christian McCaffrey. But if you can limit him as best as possible, or limit at least his impact as best as possible, like go out there and run for 100 yards if you want to, but if you don't find an end zone, then that's not helping San Francisco too terribly much. And so if New Orleans can keep the game within pace from a scoring perspective and put points on the board with their offense, or even with their special teams to a certain extent, then I think that New Orleans could be in a really good place here. And the Saints are clearly very focused on what they're going to need to do to limit Christian McCaffrey. I think that's why you see some of these defensive line guys coming up a little bit more. Again, Fadil Diggs makes sense. You want 4 edge rushers. 4 edge rushers is better than 3 edge rushers. But bringing Jonah Williams back up, just like they did last week, going up against one of the better rushing offenses from 2024. Was it 2025? Sorry. Now you're going up against one of the other better rushing offenses here in 2025, as well as back in 2024. And so you can see the same game plan kind of, or a similar game plan rather, or level of preparation on the defensive line kind of taking shape. So I think it's a wise move by New Orleans. And I think that it's one that ideally sets them up in an opportunity to be able to come up with an upset tomorrow. So make sure you come back for the show tomorrow after the game. I don't know if Lance will be live, but I do know that Dylan and Darian will certainly be live. I'll jump in when I can. I won't end the stream early this time like I did by accident last time. Whoops, my B. And that will give us our squad show, and then I'll be live, or I'll have a show that'll go up a little bit later as well, and we'll break it all down. Don't forget that you can catch us every Monday through Friday over in the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network at 10 a.m. at least once a day. So make sure you go and check that out. And for your second listen today, why not go and check out Locked On NFL, see what's going on around the rest of the league. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me in the show. If you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, N-O-L-A. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.